Welcome back to Plague Scythe Studios, everyone. Ryan here. Today, I'm taking an overdue look at a product that is perhaps so pathetic that it would be insulting were it not so cheap. The Marshall MS-2 micro amplifier. The gear curiosity du jour represents a class of product that hardly, if ever, gets seriously covered on this website, and I understand why. In general, the videos that feature a micro amplifier like this, or one from a competing brand, they flow in one of two extremes. On the one hand, you've got people that'll make videos where they review or demo something like this, chuck a microphone up to it that's as big, if not bigger, than the product itself, strum some chords, play some high gain material, and just kind of like point and laugh at, oh, it's so small and buzzy and cute. Look, guys, it's trying. And then the other extreme, you got people that'll take like several dozens of these and try to, line up a 50 watt or 100 watt equivalent amplifier and say, oh, look, this is what happens when you put a bunch of 1 watt amps, and go all out on production and all that kind of stuff. The kind of video I want to make today is one that, a little bit more seriously looks at what this product does well and what it's trying to accomplish, and ultimately why I think 99% of us should not be wasting money on something like this. Fortunately for me, I've had this in my closet for like 11, 12 years at this point, although the relatively new finish would not let you know that anytime soon. This has been kept in plastic in the original packaging and everything. And I actually went into buying this product with pretty, I would say, respectable intentions. But, I ultimately learned my lesson on this, and it wasn't a complete waste of money. But the argument I want to make today is that there's a decent circuit in here. It could be, modified, and there's a couple things I think should be optimized if you were to make it into a stomp box, and plenty of people have modified these kind of things into stomp box forms. But ultimately, it's kind of crippled with the form factor they shoved it in, and 90% of this is marketing BS as usual. So my story with the Marshall MS-2 began when I was a young teen looking for an affordable and portable guitar rig for the summer times, because whether I was traveling with family or going over to a friend's house or camping or whatever, there was plenty of opportunities for me to need to bring a guitar by request, but I couldn't fit a combo amplifier, or I didn't have the power requirements to actually run one. And I wanted something that I could fit in a backpack, or throw on top of my clothes and be done with it, or even preferably just fit inside a guitar case. And that's where the MS-2 comes in. Now, there's a lot of attractive features in a form factor like this when you first look at it, besides the included belt clip. I guess you can make that an instrument in and of itself. But you've got, besides the very limited, single input, there is a recording or headphone output. So if you wanted to practice late at night or warm up without disturbing anyone else, you could still do that, which is a feature that even a couple of my smaller combo amps don't have. You could run this off of a 9-volt battery, so that eliminates power concerns. But if you do have access to it, you can also run off of a standard 9-volt pedal power supply, which is what I'll be doing for the time being in this video. With a measly 2.5-inch speaker and 1 watt power rating, I certainly wasn't expecting to be rattling any walls with this thing, or even sound as full as I could with my other gear. But there was one aspect of this amp that I ultimately found to be far more limiting in the way that I intended to use it. You can see this is kind of a 2-channel amp. You have on, which is supposed to be your clean mode, and the OD mode. But aside from not having independent volume and tone controls, this is really like just adding a distortion circuit in front of the power section. When you have this on the on position, you're basically running your guitar DI straight through the power section. And so the tone kind of controls it sounds like a bit of a low pass filter. I don't exactly know what frequency. I'm not going to spend time analyzing this circuit. And the volume control is not clean volume in the sense that, you know, if you crank it up loud enough, you can definitely just get some overdrive and break up on this clean channel. So unless you have the volumes very low, you're never going to get clean out of this, which is fine for a Marshall budget product like this. But then the overdrive circuit adds what I think is a transistor distortion circuit up front, and it doesn't really change the overall sound signature. It does get a bit louder, obviously, but it's a dirtiness that I never found particularly inspiring to play through. It's fine for, you know, crunchy power chords, but I ultimately decided that if I'm going to go through all this trouble anyway, maybe I'll just take one more distortion pedal, put it on a belt loop, and run off of a 9-volt battery and put it in front of here as a glorified loudspeaker. And that's pretty much how I use this thing. Of course, I certainly don't blame Marshall for not making this circuit some super high gain thrash machine. That's obviously not what a lot of people were buying this for. It would have limited you know, its functionality for a lot of players and had been more expensive, so I get it. And you know, I was ultimately happy with the setup that I arrived at, even if it did cost one more 9-volt battery and just a little bit more space. But, you know, shrinking down to a pedal in this was kind of what I wanted, and it was mission accomplished for the short time period that I ended up using this. Now, at the time, this was pretty much the only product that even resembled this form factor in this price category. There's a couple other ones out there. Marshall now makes one with two. Maybe they even had a second speaker that time as well. The EVH brand has one that is, let's be real, it's probably made in the exact same factory as this thing. And there's other more expensive micro amp derivatives out there that can even be separated in head and cab form. You've had other kind of modeling units that are another couple tiers up in price that we'll talk about, some of which existed at the same time that this was first released. But my argument for today's video is I don't think anyone should be buying one of these used, especially for the use case that I just gave you. I think there's far better products out there, even if you do have to spend a little bit more money. And unless you want to tinker and make this thing into something that I think it should have been from the get-go, and you just enjoy this kind of stuff, I wouldn't recommend you buy one of these, period, because my overall takeaway from today's findings is that this is a decent pedal circuit trapped in a crappy amplifier. Let's talk about a couple of things you might have picked up on there before I move on to some more focused demonstrations that really cement my stance on this product as a whole. First things first, this puny 2.5-inch speaker. Now, there's only so much you can do with something of this size. There are other amplifiers in a similar class that are ultimately more expensive that use slightly larger speakers, and you know, one would think at first, you know, anything under 10 inches is not going to sound all that much like a guitar amp. And there's still some truth to that, but it is amazing to me how exponentially better things get once you just go up a couple inches in terms of diameter. Probably has a lot to do with surface area, if I had to guess. But aside from its low output, aside from its small diameter, it's stuck in a plastic enclosure that's not exactly musical. The way that, it kind of focuses into your ear, it always sounds buzzy and boxy and like a ham radio. It's just the way it is. There's nothing you can really do to fix this thing unless you modded an effects loop and stuck a graphic EQ in there to the point that you would probably squash the mid so much that you wouldn't be able to hear anything anyway. So a speaker like this is just not going to reproduce frequencies the same way that something like this would, or even a 1x8 combo amp. Next, we have the volume and tone controls, and hopefully the volume behavior was rather apparent there with it getting dirtier as you turn it up, especially past noon. But the tone is particularly interesting to me because this isn't like your typical post-distortion tone stack. You've got stuff like your standard Marshall type tone stack, which when you slash mids, turn up treble, turn up bass, it changes the way the amp sits in the mix. It does not change the inherent character of the gain structure. And this sort of does where it's sitting at in the circuit, because as you hear, your pick attack kind of gets more pronounced up in the later half of the tone spectrum, whereas you dial it back and it kind of gets fuzzy and more low end heavy, which again would coincide with it being sort of a low pass filter. But this can be really handy in something like an overdrive circuit where we see tube screamer derivatives, or even like the Rat pedal use either tone control like this or a treble filter to change things like how much bass is being rolled off or how much you're emphasizing the higher frequencies. Lastly, and this is something that probably wasn't nearly as obvious in this last demonstration as it's going to be, the gain structure does not react very well, at least on the OD channel, to high output pickups. So if you have really cranked active EMGs or blackouts or something, you are very prone to get this bass, fuzzy, farty pick attack. It's not good. Although it can kind of sound cool in a pseudo fuzz way. Does not sound the same as when you hit, say, a Plexi or even a JTM 45 or especially JCM 800 style amp. Hard in the front input, does not clip the same. Ultimately, it sounds like the circuit just cannot handle that kind of gain. So, all that got me thinking, this sounds less like a micro Marshall amplifier, more like, something that, maybe you would see in a pedal circuit somewhere. All of that culminates in the headphone jack, which, as it turns out, is basically a low-level tap right off of the amplifier circuit. Nothing else. And that's interesting because most of the time with, practice amplifiers or even some larger amplifiers that have direct or headphone outputs, they have some sort of fake implemented to make it sound like there's a guitar speaker involved. Something like a cab clone, for instance, where it will kind of gently roll off the low end and then maybe harshly cut off everything above 9 or 10,000 hertz, maybe give you a little bit of a bump in those vocal mids to make it sound more like a speaker in the room sound that we're used to. And of course, there's more advanced things to do like impulse responses, but not something I would expect to see on a product like this. Now, with this direct output, you're hearing nothing but the amp circuit, which in the cleanest of clean settings can be usable, but on the overdrive settings, it's the sound of, well, a cheap amplifier and nothing else. And even the best guitar amps sound terrible without some sort of speaker load. Well, not speaker load, you have to have a load when it comes to tube amps, but some sort of speaker filter in the equation. And you'll hear what I mean in a moment. So for this test, I'm going to play this amplifier straight through the headphone output, and then I'm going to cut away to the same signal, then applied with the 2No12 sound plugin using power amp simulation and a cabinet. And then you'll hear how much this actually benefits from being able to run straight into a larger cabinet sound and what you could expect if this were sort of a DI pedal instead of a combo amp. I've always tried to champion the adage that a quality speaker cabinet is basically the key to a good guitar tone, or in the case of direct recording, an impulse response. And if this doesn't convince you, then basically nothing will, because we transformed a snotty direct transistor headphone output into something that sounds pretty much like a recorded amplifier. Obviously, there's some things that I would like to fix about it, but this sounds already way more like a professional circuit. So, that got the gears turning a little bit. What else could we do with this to make it sound better? Well, we can always throw a boost in front like I used to do. I'm not going to use my metal distortion for this, but, let's see how the overdrive channel reacts with a super overdrive pedal. Maybe we can get something that sounds more like a full-fledged Marshall amp then. And let's go through the same virtual power amplifier and cabinet impulse response. I find this to be yet another improvement. Compared to the baseline sound I was getting out of this product, I would be far happier with this demonstration for any practicing or traveling application, though at this point we're like 3 layers of outboard gear deep. You can still hear there's good stuff happening under the hood. With that said, there's still an element of low fidelity, like a band pass going on here, that is sort of akin to other distortion pedals you might hear out there, ones that aren't necessarily metal oriented, but take your run-of-the-mill DS1 or even a rat pedal with filter not all the way up, and you can kind of hear it doesn't have quite the same broad frequency spectrum that a regular preamplifier would, or especially not a tube power amplifier. So that kind of got me thinking, well, let's just make this the pedal instead of making this an amplifier in a pedal size format. Let's put it into a tube amplifier. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. And I'll show off a couple of sounds that I liked once I dialed them in on each of the clean and overdrive modes. And of course, this is not an actual pedal, so I can't just bypass it, unfortunately. But you'll be hearing the sound snippets with this unplugged from the circuit, and then the second repetition will be going through the input, out the headphone, out into this amp. regardless of your opinion on those tones or any part of this video up to this point, what I hope this has proven in some really roundabout weird way is that the individuals or singular individual who had a hand in making this circuit, they're no idiot. They know what they're doing. I mean, this through other gear sounds actually quite awesome. Is it super remarkable? We never heard these sounds before? No, but it is really cool, I think. And that's all we expect out of any other dirt circuit, you know, when it comes to a super overdrive or an OCD or a tube screamer or a rat pedal. You know, we don't listen to the direct response and then chuckle because it sounds bad. So I feel bad in a way that that's what we've been doing with these amplifiers, but that's how they're presenting them. You know, again, I hope that at the end of the day, you come to the same conclusion that I have, and that there's a really cool pedal circuit in here that is being drowned by a crappy amplifier build. This is one of those instances where the sum of its parts is exponentially less than if you just evaluated each one on its own, except maybe for this, you know, lo-fi speaker and crappy plastic build quality. But do I blame Marshall or any other company for that matter making a product like this? Not really. You got to have some fluff somewhere. You got to have some high volume, relatively low margin thing that will undoubtedly fly off the shelf for its cuteness factor, because it is affordable. And I don't know how they make this for 50 bucks anyway, to tell you the truth, especially once you compare it to other pedal circuits. But, you know, plastic, they cut corners some other places. With that said, I think of a large blame lies with the consumers, and that includes me. I bought this with, I think, relatively pure intentions, but there is a part of me that was like, oh, look at it, it's so small, and it's got Marshall on it, so it's got to be cool. And that crap needs to stop. We as customers need to stop consuming like that. Not that it's ever going to happen, but at least in this little guitar sphere, I think we need to hold these manufacturers to a bit of a higher standard than we do a lot of the times. And this is just, you know, example number one. Is this the most egregious product out there? No, but it represents a class of amplifiers, if you will, that I honestly don't think need to exist anymore. I'll give them props for what they were trying to do, but this in this year, late 2019, maybe early 2020, by the time you watch this, is just a cynical cash grab as far as I'm concerned. So as opposed to this, what I would recommend you do is don't drop $50 on something like this, or $75 or whatever some of the relatively larger ones are going for. Save that up, spend it on something that costs double, you know, triple, 150 bucks for, say, like an individual amp head, like an Orange Micro Dark, or the Nano, was it Hot Tone makes the Nano guys that are like this big, 5 watts. Even if you can't afford to buy an entire amplifier package, you could at least have something to play through headphones. A lot of these things have like auxiliary ins. Hell, the Boss Katana Mini, I think, is $100 flat, and if it's a little bit more than that, memory's not serving me well right now. You can also always look on the used market. Black Star has the Fly, I believe, and all these things generally come equipped with speakers that are bigger than this, if not, you know, significantly bigger. They are at least a little bigger, and I find it helps. If you want to, you know, save your money for quite a bit longer, then maybe you move up to something like the Yamaha modeling amps, which a lot of people have loved for several years. Whatever the case may be, this is one of those instances where I think value, because we're talking in a price category that is so budget oriented, even if the value is similar between all these things, overall, the more you spend, the better you're probably off in the long term, unless you just need this for like a 1 or 2 off kind of application. I think one of those more extensive products that has multiple channels will last you so much longer and will be an overall more inspiring tool to play through. And that's what it's all about, because for me, this is not. It never has been. So I'll probably hang on to it just for nostalgia's sake, but there's a reason it looks brand new, even though it's like 12 years old now. And hopefully this video has explained that thoroughly. So any other questions, comments, please leave them down below. I'm certainly not an expert on micro amplifiers, as I've not tried but a small percentage of the ones out there. But if you're looking for one, want to throw in your 2 cents, then let me know. Hopefully we can come to a conclusion and make a recommendation for someone. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.